The UK government is inept and in crisis.
Hello and welcome to the Mark and Pete Show.
Yep.
Many analysts have described the UK government as being inept, and in fact, they actually believe that it's now at a point of crisis. Why is this? Well, the government would say that the pandemic that we have seen in 2020 is responsible for the impact on the economy and also areas of lack of investment. But this isn't just the case around the pandemic. Many people say it's not about the pandemic alone. Many issues have been simply neglected. And if you actually think about Boris Johnson's current plans for the economy, plans for investment, where have they all gone? Many people say now, what is the future of the United Kingdom? Can we fix it? Well, here's a little thought. Can the UK debts ever be cleared from the sources we owed? Can the UK economy be rebooted where once it prosperously flowed? Can the housing crisis disappear so everyone has an abode? Can all the jobs be restored across every county postcode? Can borders be secured or will they just overload? Can the UK remain united or will it even implode? Can politicians fix things because nothing has yet showed? Or can the can again be kicked down the proverbial road? Well, Clergyman Pete, the can is being constantly kicked down the road.
I think it is.
I will ask you, do you think that the UK government is now in crisis? Is it just simply not fit for purpose?
I think to a large extent, you referred to the being a crisis. I think the government is the crisis in that its response to COVID-19 has created more problems than the disease itself, partly through a misunderstanding of what the disease was. At least initially, it was thought to be a completely new virus. In fact, it is very, very similar to what we might now call SARS-1, COVID-SARS or COVID-SARS-1. This is COVID-SARS-2. They're so similar that it's not really a new virus. And so the overreaching response that the government put in place was wrong, but how to correct? When you are put in that sort of political dilemma, to tell the truth that you got it wrong or to keep ploughing on and getting more and more different size shovels to dig a bigger hole. Guess what the government's done? Yep, it's sinking fast.
Well, I think that the sinking fast is a very good analogy because what we're seeing here is some worrying underlying signs. And you have to sort of not necessarily ignore the impact of COVID-19, but you have to look at those other things that just don't seem to be being surfaced in government and discussed. And so I was interested in an analogy that was brought out. As we all know, Rishi Sunak has put in various measures to try and basically plug the gap on the economy, but also other areas of public spending. So, Clergyman Pete, here is a little quiz for you. This is a quiz which is around if public spending was £100, effectively scaling the proportion of our public spending.
Public spending, yeah.
I would like to ask you, how would it be split? What would be the biggest spend? So imagine that we scale our economy and our public spending to £100.
Yeah.
Of the £100, what do you think is the biggest spend?
I would say, let me see, that the biggest spend would be something to do with, surely it should be wages, shouldn't it? Is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about the public money?
I'm talking about public spending. So what the government would spend our taxes effectively.
Okay, I'm going to
contributed to the coffers of the government.
I'm going for NHS.
Well, certainly welfare, yes, and benefits and other spending. That would take up a massive £41 of the £100. What do you think would be next?
Oh, right. So was...
This is welfare benefits. So you did mention about the health. I will be honest. The health is £17.50, so that would be second.
Oh, so that's
what do you think would be third?
Right.
If you think of the facets of government and how typically think of it in ministerial
Do you
terms,
say
that's probably
so?
an
So
easier way
health.
of
Well,
thinking of it.
I call it the NHS, but your health generally.
It health, yes,
That was
that would include,
second.
yes.
That was second, was it?
Yes.
Yeah. Um, well, I'm going to say something like, is it to do with? It's either going to be defence or education schools. I'm going with defence, probably.
Well,
The army
actually,
spending a
defence is
lot.
lower down. That would only take a proportion of £4.50. Now,
Oh,
education
right.
would be
Oh, that was my other.
£7.
Oh, right. Oh, okay.
Now, you
Yes.
think about education, bearing in mind that we've talked about this on Mark and Pete many a time, is absolutely fundamental to the growth and the prosperity of any nation,
No, yes, of
and yet
course. Yeah,
only
absolutely.
takes £7 of our £100.
Yeah.
What is worrying for me is something that's called business. Yes, folks,
Yes.
businessman Mark speaking now, and that only takes, as part of the government investment, £2.
So,
And
yes.
I have a real worry over the priorities of government. And many people will say, yes, but it's important that we have a welfare system and a health system that's robust. Of course it is. But I would also say that it's absolutely crucial that we invest in our future. And when you think about the way that we now need to get out of this terrible debt situation, how are we going to do it? We're not going to be investing more in NHS beds and hope that that's going to solve the economy, because it isn't,
No,
because
no.
that's a spend.
Yes.
And so, therefore, we need to invest in education. That, in my opinion, is one key area.
Yep.
But we also need to invest in local government.
Now, did you say that what the number one was there? The number
Well,
one
the number
spending?
one is welfare benefits, which is at £41. So it's a
Okay, so welfare.
huge
Yeah.
proportion.
Now, that presumably, though, doesn't include furlough payments
Well,
because that
that
would vastly
no,
increase
what
it.
it does have is has a miscellaneous spending, which is not entirely clear how that's actually split. But my biggest worry is the business, which is really, really low on the
Yes,
priority list
investment
here.
in business, you would have thought would have been. You would have
£2
thought.
out of £100 if we were to do that proportional scale.
Yes.
And this is where we come back to, is it inept? Because, folks, we will not only want to solve the problem of COVID-19, absolutely, there is an absolute priority to make sure that vulnerable people are catered for. At the same time, and this is why I want to try and strip away this cloud, this mist around government. Government is there to not only plug the gaps in our economy, to be able to help to build for the future and invest for the future. What we're saying is, and what I'm saying in particular is, I cannot see where Rishi Sunak, Mr. Johnson, and his lovely little friends in cabinet, I don't see their long-term vision for how we now trade out. Because as we
Yeah.
very well know, that with the negotiations that are happening with Europe, yes, Brexit, and that's only one component of your business strategy. So I say that in the nationalistic sense of how the UK PLC is trying to sort of think about where it trades in the future.
Yeah.
You have to invest in education and you have to invest in business. And it's remarkable that even if I add them both up at £9 out of 100 is a woeful amount. Now, I
Yes.
know that things like transport that typically takes £2.50 out of the scale. Housing and local government is remarkably only £2 again. And localism, I think, is important because I think that
Yeah.
the way forward
Yeah.
to build our economy back is to help those small and medium-sized businesses. Governments can do that. Where if you have the right type of mindset, you can invest in training, you can invest in local communities, not just in infrastructure, although that in itself is important. How many potholes do we trip over nowadays? I think the whole country has become one large pothole, and it's a gaping one. It's got a very large debt in it. So I really bring this out now as part of our principle is that, where do we now go forward? Is the government really capable of of getting us out of this situation. And I don't just mean the COVID situation. This is,
No,
to me, it's an important subject, but it is not the biggest
no,
subject that we
no,
should be talking
no,
about.
no. It's not.
I
And
fear that
yeah,
what
you're
we're doing
correct.
is we're just seeing this large pothole, black hole, financial hole that I just cannot see how we're ever going to be able to fill it.
Yes. Now, it's not capable. This government is not capable of doing that. In fact, it wasn't capable of running the economy well in the first place, insofar as it was attempting to do so. When this government was voted in, it came in on the promise of getting Brexit done without much fleshing out of many of their policies. And there was a reason for that. You don't want to give details which are hostage to fortune and make you lose the election, as Theresa May nearly did, because she went into so much detail, had this big vision. But the problem with this government is that it is not here to mark and Pete principles of free trade and localism and long-termism. What it's doing really, it's really being, instead of a conservative government, it's being a socialist government. I mean, it's as though Corbyn won, is what I would say. The way, even
Oh
if we,
dear. You heard it
even
here,
in that
folks.
his principles remain the same. It's just weird to me that Boris Johnson won as a Conservative Prime Minister. People across the country voted for him rather than for the Labour Party, and then he behaved like the Labour Party as though he was doing them a favour. He said, we want to be a government for them as well." Yes, but they voted for you, and you were different to those jokers. So why don't you, as the Conservative jokers, do your Conservative thing? And one of the reasons is that Boris Johnson himself isn't really what I would call conservative. He's a liberal, if anything, and his view of running government is statism, big government involvement, big spending, which in the end also involves, because of the rise of government tinkering and involvement in business and everything that's going on. It involves more regulation, squeezes out small businesses. And so I think that we basically, I think we were screwed anyway, Mark. That's what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, but here's the worrying fact. So here's a few more stats, because we love
Yes.
those on
Oh,
Mark and Pete.
yes. Lots.
So how is
Big
the
fan.
government, or how are we, yes, the folks, the citizens of the United Kingdom, going to pay for all this? The
Yes.
principle actually works almost the same for our lovely friends across the pond in America. How is America going to pay for the biggest debt in in national history? I mean, theirs is just burgeoning and increasing all the time. Now, the principle here is you have to look at the taxes that you're bringing in, the income, and you also then have to look at your debts and where you may be looking to borrow money. Now, Rishi Sunak will sit there with a little smug face and say, "Yes, but look, it's really cheap at the moment. I can borrow at a very, very cheap rate." Well, that
Yes.
may be very true, but it all comes down to the amount that you're borrowing, because although things today may be very cheap, what about your future income? Now, at the moment, if you look at the stats, between 2019 and 2020, the taxes were pretty much the taxes, as you sort of look at it, as the before coronavirus, were around 94% could have just covered it for the borrowing. So if you think about the economy in 2019 to 2020, and then you think about the debts that we're now sort of incurring, which are going to be
Yeah.
topping over
Yeah.
£1 trillion. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
folks, that's right. And Clergyman Pete will have to pay that back for
Mm-hmm.
you, everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. No problem.
He would have probably, over what would have been just over a year ago, only covered 94%. With 2020 to 2021, because of the damage to the economy, with businesses going bust, he's only going to be able to cover 64% of it. So that is a massive, massive hit. So how are we going to fill the gap? And what I'm worried about is this. I know that if you're going to borrow money, wouldn't you borrow the money to plug the gaps in the areas that matter? And I do think that we are worrying, because we're in a worrying situation. Many people who are listening to this podcast will probably think, hold on, what Rishi Sunak has done, he's secured my role. He's paying me on a furlough. He's paying me so that my job is secure and that the business is secure. That may be true. And I would hope that in many cases that the businesses will continue. The likelihood is what we're going to see, and here's a prediction, is that when that furlough system ends, currently at the end of March, goodness knows, and I hope he doesn't extend it, because what will happen is that debt will just keep on rising and rising. But if it does stop, you will see this basically the dam will open up, because there's suddenly those jobs will have to go back into the economy, into the market, and carry on trading. But there is no business. And that's the problem, because what we've
Yeah.
got is a false economy. There are people who I know are actually out of work, and that is a bad scenario. But what is worrying is how many of the people that are currently perceived to be in the economy, but when it comes to March of 2021, will go out and suddenly find that actually those leaders of businesses are only really holding on to those jobs because of the furlough system.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
the real situation, because that means that the debt situation, it could potentially be worse, not only with the payback, but the actual monies that you have to pay back. And the borrowing, I think, could just be astronomical.
Yes. Now, there's another area of the country's life which has been hit by the inept government, and that is the way that it's responded to the COVID-19 pandemic, which was really as a pandemic back in March and April, has resulted in really the ruining of society, or as you might say, this society has been made sick. The effects of their lockdown. Just think what's happening. You don't get too close to people. You certainly don't shake hands or hug them. You don't get close to people. You let your aging relatives die alone, lonely. You don't get together to worship. You don't get together to do sports. So every now and then you let people go out and even pay for them in the that scheme for people to go and eat out, the eat out to help out scheme. You get them to stuff their faces, but you don't let them go to the gym. You ruin the health and the emotional health of the people by making them lock away, including people who are, one, lonely and suffering from mental health, or two, being abused by the people you've locked them up with. The whole of society has been ruined by this government's response. This is where the ineptness come in. They thought we've got to do something, and it seemed like they thought, well, this is something, we'll do it. They did something without looking at the consequences, which is extraordinary considering the reason they had such a huge and inept response was that they had these predictions that they were relying on that proved to be 10 times wrong. There were people making other predictions. There was one, a recent comment by a professor who made his own models of what would happen with the spread of the disease, the number of deaths. If you remember, it was estimated to be 500,000. This professor says lockdowns do nothing, but my prediction was 50,000. Was 10 times less. And that's exactly what happens. There were people out there telling them. They could have had a mixture of different voices and came to a decision. They did eventually bring in other voices. To start with, they were looking at a certain predictive model. They didn't seem to have any predictive model what was going to happen to society. And just like the economy, it's been ruined by their ineptness, their unwillingness to think long term. The Mark and Pete mantra, along with localism, is long-termism. It's completely absent from this government.
Yeah, and this is going to seem probably a little bit strange from my angle, but I do see the well-being side affecting business. There's no question about that. I can tell you that many business leaders have been in a quandary over their staff in terms of what does that mean for those individuals who are now having to work from home? They're putting more pressures on their family life. It could be that that they can't socially interact because, as you say, they've been effectively stuck in a little box at home somewhere. And for those people who are living in conurbations, intense conurbations, if they're living in a small one-bedroom flat for long periods of time, that can't be very good. But here's the other thing which I would say, and that is when you think about the well-being of somebody in business, their well-being of something in business also links to the social needs, because you want those individuals to have a social life and a community which they can engage in. We're social animals. We want to engage. And I would come back to the point, which is that what I'm worried about, and this is why I'm going to push it over to you, and that is about the impact on religion and on churches that have been closed, communities that have been closed. So people who go to churches come from all walks of life, and my concern here is that you've effectively stripped away the community, and I don't see how some of those communities can recover. And I don't just mean going to church, although that's one aspect. There is the clubs, there's the pubs, there's all those sort of things. You lose touch. Now, bearing in mind that this lockdown has been backwards and forwards, lock, unlock, lock to unlock, and so on. And we've had sort of very strange methods rolled out by the UK government. And I will say that we're not the only nation that's suffered from this. But if we put it on the lens of the United Kingdom, how are we prepared in terms of being able to go back out into society? Are we now past the point of no return? Are we now seeing that there's a generation of children that can't socially interact in the same way that we would have expected?
Yeah. I think it's affecting people immensely, and one of the serious effects is that some of it could well be permanent. Well, permanent at least for a generation or so. What we're seeing, yes, in terms of schooling, not really the sort of schooling that you would have. Certainly not in terms of practical subjects. For example, my son is involved in film production in his school. That's what one of the main subjects he's covering. You can't really make films properly unless you can get people together and mixing, which they're not doing. So you're missing out on a lot of both the actual studying the subject, but the mixing with other people that you would normally do. He's kept separate from other people. And in terms of the churches, yes, one of the biggest problems is this. So I would take it further and say it's a messaging or a psychological or even a branding problem. This is what happened. The church buildings were closed. The message that was sent was, the church buildings have been closed because of COVID-19. So we care about you as long as you're not sick. So whatever rationale you come up with, that's the message you're sending. We can't help you. God can't help you. There's no point having the church open. Churches open. It's not essential. Boris Johnson will look after us.
Well,
Goodness.
does it now?
What is it? That's really down to the government, but also the church leadership. We needed to stand up against this government.
Well, this is where I wanted to sort of conclude, and we want to sort of get to lead sort of our listeners to sort of pitch in here, because is it now that what we're really saying is that the mechanism of government is no longer fit for purpose? Is it better now that what we see is the model that we've seen before, where governments have year on year made bad decisions, lack of investment? We've talked about the percentages, we've gone through that. But more importantly, is it now a case where we scale back government and we rely more on leaders through either industry or church or community to effectively run the nation? Meaning you still have a government setting policy, and you still have government to manage taxes and resources on that front. But we've talked about this, I know, before, where are we as a nation just simply overburdened with public civil servants
yes, it's the short
and
answer,
politicians that really can't make a decisive way forward in terms of where we best invest and how we set the course or charter a course
Yeah.
out of this situation now?
Well, one of the problems is that if we look at the government that we have, they all come from a very narrow. The people in it pretty much all come from a very narrow sector of society. It looks like the class system in Britain has not really left us. That we don't
Well, it's getting
have.
worse, isn't it?
Yeah,
Surely.
it seems to be getting worse. It seems to be people who've been to a particular small subset of schools and universities, and even to a large extent studied the same course at Oxford on politics. And we needed, in this situation, we needed just someone in cabinet who could understand maths and science just a little bit, and that would have helped. It would have helped.
True. Well, listeners, what do you think about this situation? Are you exacerbated by the situation you find yourself in at the moment? Do you think that governments are finding it really almost impossible to make a sensible decision? Is it just simply now a case that we need to rethink it? Or do you actually have faith in the government? Do you believe that the politicians that you voted for in the recent elections are doing a good job? Why not log on to markandpete.com and let us know your thoughts? Well, we'll certainly read them out on the next show. Well, join us again next time for more topical topics with Clergyman Pete and Businessman Mark.